In case you're unfamiliar, this is the trailer for Ara History Untold, a new historical strategy game, and hopefully a pretty big one at that. And through the recent Ara History Untold Become an Insider's Developers Update, the second one actually we've ever heard, we've received a whole load of new updates talking about the scale and scope of the game, the kinds of things that will be included in it, and a whole load of exciting information about what we should expect. In this video, I'm going to go through using that developer's diary, the second one of all time, as my resource, my main resource, and I'll link it in text form below for you in case you haven't signed up to the emails. It's important to note if you do sign up to them, you may get access to the early alpha build of this Ara History Untold later this year. It's coming to Steam and Game Pass. The video itself here, though, will feature, of course, the beautiful Civilization 6 gameplay footage in the background because we don't yet have any information or gameplay footage of Ara History Untold. However, we do already know a little bit about it from when it was revealed a couple of months ago. We know the game is about exploring a living world. They're aiming to have infinite replayability, a dynamic world with different landscapes, etc., ruling our own way through history's most influential figures, but also reshaping it through our own choices as well, through custom leaders. We know that the game will be about, of course, building a nation, right? The land is our canvas, the maps, the biomes, the infrastructure, the strategic resources, and finally it'll be about proving our worth. The fate of our people will rest on us, and our ability to win the game will stretch beyond a simple linear system. We've been told that already in the developers' interviews. So then, dear viewer, what have they shared with us today in the second developer's diary update? Let's jump straight in. And the very first point that we'll be covering is scale and scope. The devs highlight here just how big they boast Ara will be. They say hands down the biggest game that many here within the studio have worked on, and that it's a breath of fresh air, poses a unique set of challenges to solve. Of course, they would say that. Hopefully that proves true. They go on to say that one thing they wanted to do was a better job at modeling the early modern world. This is quite important because if you think about historical strategy games, they do tend to sort of lag a little bit around that sort of turn of the modern era. They go on to say that many games in the genre focus on specific time frames, and many choose an earlier position in history to set their game. Early times, right? Ancient era, for example, is a massive one in the genre of broader historical strategy games. Those ancient world ones in particular are really significant, though, right? They go on to say there's a lot here that's already been treated, and they'd like to focus a little bit more on the far future as well, the what-ifs of interstellar space. I like that. They go on to say they're going to try and model some of the challenging situations that occur in our modern day-to-day lives, diplomatic alliances spanning many countries like the United Nations, perhaps on steroids, world wars, as well as global economics, and I'm sure economic crises, although they don't specifically mention it in the developer diary, they basically hint at it. A lot of these things are things that I've been calling for in Civilization, in my Civilization wishlist videos. Really exciting to see that they might be playing around with them a little bit more. They go on to talk about how these kind of threats will span not only just 8 players in the game, but where everyone is a potential threat. What if, for example, there were 15 or 20 players in a game? They quiz us. Would be really interesting if they could see something like this to run with real players more than 8. And a little bit on the actual scale of the map itself. They go on to say that the map is, quote, monstrous in scale, end quote. If we're going to hold all of those, insert secret number here of players in one space, the map certainly needs to be big, feature varying geological formations, all of that kind of thing. The map itself, we know, will feature distinct biomes. It's a big part of some of the screenshots that have been released. You can see it here on screen as well. And that's all for scale and scope, although we do have a little bit more about space as a constraint. So let's move on to that second point. And I have to be honest, this one is a little unusual. The gist of it is basically that while the map is absolutely ginormous, it doesn't run infinitely. And with a maximum number of players, eventually, perhaps a couple of eras in, you'll be restrained. All of you will be, likely, by the obviously not infinite land around you. Basically, the world will fill up with people. They go on to say, take a look at any actual map of the last 100 years. You'll find that people tend to spread out and take up space until they hit the borders of other people doing the same thing. The world isn't peppered with swaths of unowned territory and empty wilderness, and Ara will be no different. You'll need to figure out your space constraints as part of your nation's continued growth, whether it be through friendly diplomatic dealings, recombining your regions into more productive units. More on that in a few weeks, they say. That'll be interesting to see if there's a way to scale up or down regionality of your existing world to maybe sort of reduce the micromanagement, I imagine. Maybe also help with expansion, although that remains unclear. Or, of course, finally, you could do it with less friendly dealings involving, quote, pointy sticks, end quotes. I like it. But basically, this is saying the world isn't infinite, and the role of the lack of empty space will be very important in how you deal with other players. This, I don't think, is too dissimilar from existing strategy games, although, of course, thinking about something like Civilization 6, there does tend to be a little bit of dead zone, wasted space, and maybe that's the same in Civ 5 games like Humankind as well. We'll see how they play this one out. This next point is all about tactics, and as you can see by the image on screen, they're teasing a little bit about, quote, tackling optimal strategy. Another big area the team wanted to focus on was what to do with the giant elephant in the strategy room, as they call it, a friends and nemesis optimal strategy. Basically, the role of min-maxing on one end, and then simply playing for chaotic fun on the other. And how do they draw between deep diving into systems that are complex and intriguing, where players want to figure out how best to use them, but also by making a game that is fun, not only to work out how to use it, but also just to actually use. They go on to say that other facts in involving their system include that crushing your enemies beneath your superior wit and intellect is fun, and that doing the same damn string of actions every game you play once you've figured out the right thing and only strategy to win is not fun. And I completely and wholeheartedly agree. I think there are a range of different things that could factor in to change this, help with this, including randomness and entropy. Let's see what they've said, though. They say, and actually it's quite a nice example, so let's run through it. Take as a singular example of this, our old friend the tech tree. Lots of games have them. The issue with something like a present technology tree with present costs is that you've created a solvable system. There is a shortest path. Basically, what they're saying here is a path of least resistance, and therefore will always follow it. They go on to say that there are algorithms to employ tactics to operations research to do it easy peasy. It takes the magic out of it, and also arguably the fun. Deciding what next to research if you know in the back of your mind that metallurgy over archery will cost you 5 turns worth extra, and that much needed time will be ever more useful as you move through your 300 turn game. Why would you do it? Basically, they say that's not fun. And it's not the only example of how it plagues strategy games. Pure randomness is hateful and stupid, they say, and the work of madness, end quote. However, they go on to say there is something to be said for controlled systems that shake things up. To that end, replayability is key. Who wants to play the same thing every time, build the same things? Not me, not you, it's boring. Here, basically, we understand their mantra, but don't actually understand how they intend to play out this design philosophy, other than it won't be purely random, because that's, quote, hateful and stupid in the work of of madness. But also, it needs to be replayable, and it needs to have an element of challenge, but not be a solvable system. I totally agree. Sounds like a really reasonable design philosophy. Let's see how, again, that one plays out, though, because without any real concrete examples, we'll have to wait and see until we hear more information. Next up, competition versus cooperation. Here again, they mentioned the robust player count of the game. Really looking forward to seeing just how that plays out. But basically, in a nutshell here, we're vying off between, of course, competing or cooperating with others. The team really wanted to take advantage of the ability to play with other nations who were not in direct competition for the top spot on the leaderboard. This is, of course, our city-state type things, perhaps. When you have a map of only 8 players, everyone is a potential source of competition, someone to keep an eye on. There's significantly more. Not everyone's going to be a contender, though. They've made a decision to not pre-assign nations any kind of role in the game, like a major or minor player, but rather every nation in the game, based on their own starting situation and decisions, has the opportunity to rise up and become a winner. This is really neat. And also, this is finally some concrete information about what to actually expect. This sounds like a fantastic, livable, breathable system. This one has me particularly excited. Anyway, they go on to say that a whole host of them will happily exist in the middle of the pack. However, even nations at the bottom still have their economic, militaristic, and diplomatic options available to them, which means they can safely cooperate with other players, partners, including ourselves. Scared of getting picked on by a larger threat? They quiz us. Grab a few like-sized friends to form up as an alliance. If you really want to upgrade your stuff but don't have a robust production engine or luxury goods, you could potentially get them from a friend, of course. And at its very earliest conception, Ara was not intended to be a war game. This sort of aligns with this, but they go on to say that with military being the only focus of a soul win was not part of the initial design mantra for Ara History Untold. In fact, knocking every other nation down militaristically is highly unlikely, they say, due to the scale of the maps. So not only here do we understand how different civilizations will play their much more dynamic role in the game, but also we understand that these maps are going to be absolutely ginormous, and this game was not designed with domination victories purely at its center or purely in mind. They say that, quote, we want players to be able to embrace playing the game as they want to play. And that means if you just want to happy-go-lucky friends with everyone and still play competitively, you can do that. Want to comp stomp the AI? Go for it. Just build a nation as creative and alt history endeavor, and to hell with winning in the end. We'd love to see the pictures of what you make, end quote. I think the real key takeaway here, at least my understanding, is that you will be able to dominate, although it's perhaps best done with friends. Not necessarily, though, you do you, but overall the all victory conditions will be valued, but really that dynamic ability for civilizations to rise and fall, there's a Civ 6 pun buried within the video, I think is very exciting indeed. And so I'm going to throw this last one up on screen. History is personal. This is leading into the customization element of the game, but also the ahistorical accuracy or inaccuracy, if you will. Let me read it. Which leads us into our final design tenet, that Ara history should be personal. It should be inclusive. You as the player should be able to say, I see me, I see where I came from, and I choose where I'm going to. They go on to say, quote, the scientific and humanitarian accomplishments through time are easy to celebrate. Same with cultural masterpieces from across the globe. However, there's no way to avoid the blatant fact that across human history there have been countless atrocities committed in the name of progress, in the name of tribalism, religion, economics, trade, and more. Ignoring the effect this has had on a given people we don't feel is appropriate, but neither is glorifying nor celebrating it. And then in a second paragraph, that's the end of that quote, they give a little example. They say, take an example of unprovoked warfare. I want what my neighbor has. I'm going to unalive them to get it. Is that morally acceptable? No. Should it have a place in the game in terms of a nod to historical significance and player agency? Should there be limits? What kind of rewards should it give, etc.? They say that we've tried to be thoughtful, delicate, and graceful as possible with many of these concepts. Contentious historical topics, I should say. However, I'm sure we don't always get it right despite best intentions. Let us know. Happy to discuss. In a nutshell here, this is not really offering a lot of direct information about what history as personal means. Will I have sliders for all of these different things that I determine early on? Will these characteristics grow as some sort of civilization or character develops? Will I have control over how warlike my people are by setting cultures or policies or whatever across time? Anything like that is entirely guesswork from me at this point and unclear. We'll have to wait and see what history as personal means and how that plays out in civilization creation and gameplay development. Creelement is a new word, combining those two. I should edit that out, but I'm not going to because maybe you heard it here first. I'm not sure. The key takeaway here is I think that it's something for us to watch and probably to be fairly open or at least receptive to in the early days. Don't forget, as I mentioned at the start of the video, Ara History Untold is technically not releasing in any sort of open public beta at this point, but what we do know is that there'll be a technical alpha, and when they announced the game a couple of months ago, they told us, hey, you're going to have a technical alpha, and it's going to be later in 2022. And then the game is scheduled to be released in, I think, the first half, perhaps even the first quarter of 2023. As I said at the start, it is, of course, published by Xbox, so it will be hitting PC Game Pass on day one. Not sure about console. But that brings us to the end of the video, and I thought the end would be a good place to reflect back on the start, specifically the trailer. So we'll play that through one more time and talk about what we discussed, what we've learned, because we heard a lot of words and we received some information to go with them. Firstly, the scale and scope of Ara has been boasted as massive. We're expecting large player counts and very large maps to go with it. Secondly, space will be a constraint, and that will be a particular constraint as we move through into the first few eras on how we expand and develop our empires, and in particular, perhaps, a role of alliances, trade, or warfare playing a particular role around that point. This one was a little wishy-washy. The third point was about optimal strategy versus pure randomness, and how will the game balance those two very difficult things along a spectrum of making sure it's not min-max heaven, but also not total anarchy. Fourthly, and most interestingly, we heard about the dynamic living empires that will rise and fall, no city-states or set players, but rather the two that can flow between. And lastly, that personal history. Do stay tuned for more, and I'll see you next time.